My name is GiBi, Toto's in jail, and welcome to the Horror Homestead. This is a video in an ongoing series I'm making about the Fazbear Frights series of anthology novels Fazbear's Fright, the FNAF novels. We are now talking about the 10th book in the series, Friendly Face, and its first story, Friendly Face. It's written by Andrea Wagner. The cover art is great. It's also kind of a spoiler, but I didn't realize that until it happened in the story anyway, so it's fine. It also is not the canonical description of the thing that it is of, and so that's kind of a problem. Just fix your art, Scott. You drew this yourself, Scott. Just make it right. Let's begin with a summary. Edward is clumsy. He lives with his single mother because it makes it easier to write these stories if there's only one parent. He's also 13 years old. He's always knocking stuff over, and so he's always saying, "I'm sorry." Edward's mother calls him a science geek, and makes reference to the philosophical question of what happens if an unstoppable force meets an immovable object, because he knocked his cereal bowl off the table, and it broke. Edward goes to school. He's not paying attention in class, and the teacher calls him out for it. He says, "Sorry." The teacher asks him to go to the cabinet to get a little jar full of iron shavings, and then what she's going to do is she's going to blow it on a fan and turn on a magnet so it all flies across the room so they can learn about magnets. But he accidentally grabs the black pepper, and so when she hits the fan, it sprays everywhere and all the kids start choking and coughing. "Klutz face strikes again," one of the boys shouted as they all ran from the classroom. "Sorry," Edward said when he joined his classmates in the hallway. He stopped and shrugged. There was no point in trying to explain, so he just repeated, "Sorry." Next chapter. "I wonder how many times a day I say sorry," Edward said to Jack as their bus trundled away from school that afternoon. "Sorry?" Jack tugged on his earbuds and turned his smiling face toward Edward. "I didn't hear you. Could you please repeat what you said?" "Nothing." Jack shrugged and put his earbuds back in. His smile stayed in place. Jack was nearly always smiling. One reason for that was that his lips were naturally upturned. Another was that Jack was just generally happy all the time. Edward had never known anyone as good-natured as Jack. His warm brown eyes already had faint smile crinkles in the corner. Edward is sitting next to his friend Jack on the school bus. Jack is a nerd. Jack is a nerd. But Edward is clumsy, which is why they're both outcasts. While sitting there, he accidentally elbows him, and he has to say sorry again. And then he accidentally kicks him, and he has to say sorry again. "Sorry," Edward winced. There it was again. He should start counting. Was the endless repetition of sorry a mental condition? Like Tourette's or something? Maybe he had a neurological issue and that was why his elbows, and his body in general, were always getting him in trouble. The girl sitting in front of them, Julia, calls them weird. Edward is in love with Julia, and Jack mocks him for this. "Have you lost interest in the sci-fi genre and developed one for romantic fiction?" Jack had sputtered between guffaws. "She lives on a different plane of existence, Edward. It's not possible." For reasons Edward didn't understand, this universe, not the one he and Jack were from, had its basis in a couple of strange equations. Equation 1. Interest in science minus interest in sports equals weird. Equation 2. Weird plus small equals outcast. Nerd! They get off the school bus and they hear a weird sound in the bushes next to their bus stop. The scene is kind of spooky because you think it might be something dangerous or weird because it is Fazbear's Fright. It also makes a hissing sound, so maybe it's a snake? But it turns out it's a kitten. "I thought kittens meowed," Edward said. "Kittens have a wide variety of vocalizations," Jack replied. "Their communication is as idiosyncratic as that of the average human, although the homogeneity of our classmates' utterances argue against human singularity." I should specify that in the context of that clip, Homer's calling someone a nerd, but he's then chastised for doing this for Marge. The clip's not actually calling him a nerd, it's making fun of people who would call him a nerd.
Homer, that isn't very nice.
Marge, try to understand. As a jock, it is my duty to give nerds a hard time.
They take the kitten to Jack's house. Jack's mom, Mrs. Weston, is a physics professor, and she's kinda cool. She welcomes the new kitten to their house. Jack's dad is kinda rude. He's a truck driver and he loves sports and he doesn't really get his son. He doesn't like the kitten either, but then the kitten steps on the TV remote and turns on a sports game, and now he doesn't think the kitten is all that bad. Over the course of the next few weeks and then the next few months, we follow Jack and Edward taking care of the cat, whose name is Faraday after the scientist. It's very endearing, and this book joins The Breaking Wheel and Lucky Boy in the category of stories that I wish were just books about this premise. I want to read about the cat and these boys and their school. It's really impressive how the story got to this point after only like 20 pages, where I feel like I know these kids and their family and their cat, and I'm in their house. In addition to these basic kitty accoutrements, Jack and Edward had spent the better part of the previous 3 weeks turning Jack's bedroom into a kitten play paradise. Putting their combined physics knowledge and Edward's fledgling interest in woodworking together, they built a series of platforms, ramps, and kittyways all over the walls of the room. The network of feline paths ran up over Jack's book-stuffed shelving, and then circled the room at a level just a foot or so below the ceiling. In addition to these thoroughfares, Edward and Jack built a series of chain reaction mechanisms designed to keep a feline occupied for hours. Faraday loved all of this, but what he loved most was Edward and Jack. Faraday was not just a smart kitty, he was a social kitty. He liked playing group games like Catch Me If You Can, Keep Away, which usually involved him taking off with something the humans didn't want him to have, and hide and seek. Faraday was far too good at all 3 games. He quite often tried the patience of his keepers to the point that they wanted nothing to do with him, and that's when he'd pull out his superpower. Faraday was, above all else, a cuddle master. Not aloof like any cat Edward had heard about, Faraday loved to snuggle and be stroked. His purr power was off the charts.
I've only had
Faraday.
for a day and a half, but if anything happened to him, I would kill everyone in this room and then myself.
On a warm summer day in early May, Edward carried several lengths of 2x12s into Jack's backyard. Surprisingly, Mr. Weston had helped Jack and Edward buy the lumber for their project. Edward theorized that Mr. Weston was thrilled his son had taken an interest in something manly like woodworking. While Edward and Jack planned Faraday's agility course, Faraday prowled the yard, on the lookout for large leaves left over, unraked from the fall. Occasionally, a hefty breeze would toss some leaves around, keeping Faraday well amused while Jack planned and Edward got to work. In the weeks to come, Edward would wonder whether he'd missed some sign that afternoon, something to warn him of impending disaster. Was there a hint somewhere in the time they spent training Faraday? A whisper from the gods? Any inkling of a threat? He often wasn't paying enough attention to the things he needed to, and the idea that he'd missed an important morning often kept him awake, wondering. Still, he could never pinpoint anything that would have alerted him to what was coming, and he supposed that was a good thing. In every paradise, a serpent lurked. In Edward and Jack and Faraday's paradise, the serpent was a butterfly, a pretty, orange, fluttering monarch butterfly. Okay, that was a long section. I do really like the "in the weeks to come" bit. It puts you on edge. It raises the tension. What's gonna happen? There's also 2 allusions in this section. There's obviously the allusion to the snake in paradise, which is a biblical allusion. I don't think the butterfly is Satan, but it's there. The second allusion is to the butterfly effect. The butterfly effect is the idea that small things can have drastic impacts later down the line in unforeseen ways. It comes from the idea that a butterfly flapping its wings could change wind currents so much that far away it could create a massive storm. The butterfly flapping its wings here leads to what is about to happen, and it makes the rest of the story occur and affects the lives of the main characters in many ways. Interestingly, the book never brings this up. Just like it never draws attention to how appropriate the mention earlier about an unstoppable force meeting an immovable object is, it also never mentions the butterfly effect. Thank you, Andrea Wagner, for not making me play the Say the Line Bart clip. Edward spent hours studying butterflies after it happened. He wanted to know if the butterfly's appearance was a fluke, or whether he should have been aware that butterflies were out and about. It so happened that May was indeed a normal time for butterflies. Monarchs, Edward learned during the terrible weeks after that day, lay their eggs in March and April. Their eggs hatch into larvae that grow into caterpillars, and then 2 weeks after that, the caterpillars find a nice sheltered place to start creating a chrysalis, from which the butterflies emerge. The first generation of monarchs only live 2 to 6 weeks. They have a grand time eating during that short period, and then they die after laying eggs for the second generation of monarchs. It's that generation from which the evil emerged. The first generation only lives a few weeks, but the second generation is evil? I wonder if that will matter to the story in the future. Faraday chases a butterfly. He chases it, you know what I'm gonna say, out on the road. Jack wasn't particularly fast, but he moved at the speed of light that afternoon. His typical smile gone, his lips compressed in determination, he tore out into the street after the cat, and he leaped for Faraday just as a dump truck roared around the corner and accelerated toward Cat and Boy. "Stop!" Edward yelled. He wasn't sure who he was yelling at. The truck's driver? Faraday? Jack? The only one who seemed to listen to him was the truck driver. As Edward raced toward the street to rescue his friends, the truck's driver hit his brakes. The tires squealed, but the truck was going too fast to stop in time. "No!" Edward wailed as the truck plowed right into and then over both Jack and Faraday. Frozen, Edward stared at Jack's and Faraday's contorted bodies. He didn't step forward to see if they were alive. Both lay with their necks at an odd angle, their eyes open, but vacant. Edward stumbled back, turned, and threw up in the gutter. Then his legs gave way, and he crumpled to the asphalt. He was strangely aware of the lawnmower droning on next door, but he couldn't hear anything else. The driver was out of his cab, on his phone. Someone from across the street was running forward, mouth open as if yelling. But all that was blurry and muted. The only thing Edward could see clearly was what was left of Jack and Faraday, and all he could do was sit in the street and stare into the unseeing eyes of his two best friends. "Scott."
Could you lighten up a little?
Edward is devastated. He stays in bed for the entire summer break. His mom can't do anything to help him because there's nothing you can actually do in situations like this. She tries to get him to go to therapy, but he refuses. She makes the mistake of blaming the cat for the incident, and Edward explodes at her because obviously it's not the cat's fault. He hated her for blaming Faraday. It wasn't Faraday's fault. Whose fault was it? Edward thought the fault was shared. For sure, the butterfly was at fault. If the butterfly hadn't gone into the street, Faraday wouldn't have gone into the street. If Faraday hadn't gone into the street, Jack wouldn't have gone into the street. The driver, the police said, was going 20 miles per hour over the speed limit. The tire skid marks proved that. So obviously the driver was somewhat at fault. Edward's mom said the police were charging the driver with vehicular manslaughter. Edward thought the Westons were at fault too. They were the ones who said Faraday was too rambunctious to play in the house all the time. Maybe the woman who wrote the cat training book was at fault. If she hadn't written that book, he and Jack would never have thought to build an agility course for Faraday. And of course, he and Jack were at fault too. If they had been paying more attention, if they'd gone after Faraday faster when he went around the corner, if they hadn't been so cocky about training Faraday and being so sure Faraday would follow their suggestions. If. But what good did it do to assign fault? It didn't change the outcome. That's a good outlook to have in general. It's really no one's fault beside the driver. Not sorry. But it's interesting that this is the only time in the story when Edward doesn't apologize for something. He doesn't think it's his fault. So he isn't gonna say sorry. I don't think this is intentionally trying to tell us something. I don't think Andrea Wagner is talking about something deep with this, but I do find it odd, because this paragraph comes right before the accident. Edward didn't bother to call Faraday, he just ran across the yard. Faraday wasn't paying attention to him, so Edward planned to scoop up the cat unawares and be done with the whole anxious moment. But Faraday zigged when Edward zagged, right into the street. "Faraday!" Jack and Edward screeched in unison. Because of Edward's dash toward where Faraday had been, Jack was closer to Faraday when he went into the street. So like butterfly effect-wise, Edward did do something. I guess I'm surprised he doesn't blame himself. It's not his fault, I cannot stress that enough. But he's been characterized as someone who would see this as his fault. Survivor's guilt is very real, but he only blames himself a little. He doesn't say sorry for it, which I think is very weird. Edward is trying to distract himself from his trauma, and he watches television. A commercial comes on for a new product from Fazbear Entertainment. If you send them a strand of your pet's hair, they'll make an animatronic replica of them, and it looks just like the real thing. Edward figures this will fill the kitten-shaped hole in his heart. Edward goes to the spot of the accident and finds black hairs stuck to the blood splatter that's still on the road. He sends them to Fazbear, and a few weeks later, his package arrives with his new robot cat recreation of Faraday. They're called Friendly Faces.
Hey, that's the name of the show.
He opens the box. Edward screamed and dropped the friendly face. It landed on its legs in the open box, and the styrofoam peanuts held it upright before Edward's appalled gaze. He staggered a couple times back from the table. What had he done? Edward could hear his mother's voice in his head. "Edward, you have to be more careful." How many times had she told him that his single-minded focus would get him in trouble? How many accidents had he had to clean up because he wasn't thinking about what he was doing? How many times had he messed up in school, making him the butt of endless jokes? The day Edward had shot into the street to pluck hairs from the pavement, the only thing he'd been thinking about was being done with his disgusting task so he could send off his order for his friendly face. He hadn't been really looking at what he was doing. He hadn't examined the hair he'd gathered to make sure it was cat hair. He just scraped up the first black hair he'd seen, and he'd taken off. And this is what he got for it. Sitting in front of Edward, perched on top of a mound of styrofoam peanuts like a deformed king, the body of a robotic cat was attached to the stiff, powder-white face of... Jack. Not Faraday. Jack. Instead of Faraday's sweet, furry face, the face Edward had expected to see when he'd opened the box, the human hairs Edward had sent in had resulted in the stark white mold of a dead-looking human face. Jack's face. On the hard material, Jack's brown eyes were motionless, but they appeared to be gazing intelligently at Edward, just waiting for Edward to say something so Jack could reply with his usual affected display of esoteric knowledge. Edward struggled to breathe as he stared at Jack's slightly flat nose, thick lips turned up in a smile, and his broad chin. These were Jack's features, attached to an animatronic cat. It was an abomination. Edward felt sick. Love it! Great premise, scary gross monster thing. I love where the story is going, and it's such a great concept. The cover is wrong, because Jack's eyes are brown, and he always has a smile, but the cover, you can't really see it, they're blue. Blue eyes, not smiling. Cover is wrong, Scott. Edward realizes it would be weird to throw the robot away, so he buries it in the backyard. That night there's a thunderstorm, and it's dark and spooky. He thinks he hears something trying to get inside from his window. Ooh. He gets his flashlight and starts exploring the house, trying to find where the noise is coming from. He hears it right behind him, but he spins around and there's nothing there. He goes back to his bedroom, and then he thinks it's right outside his door. He tells himself he's imagining it. He falls asleep, reciting the decimals of pi to calm himself down. A clunk followed by a shush ripped Edward from sleep. He pulled his arm from under the covers and turned on his flashlight. Its glow landed on the end of the bed, and Jack's mud-streaked smiling face. Edward screamed and screamed. Continuing to scream, Edward thrashed backward in his bed, his legs kicking out. His covers got caught in his gyrating feet, and the sheet and blanket pulled off the bed and landed in a pile on the floor. Edward's bedroom door burst open and his mother ran into the room, her own flashlight bobbing out in front of her. "Edward?" She was out of breath. "What in the world?" In a half second, Edward took in his mom's tangled hair, her pale makeupless face, her wrinkled nightshirt. Then he looked beyond her, trying to spot the familiar visage that he knew was attached to a robotic cat. It was no longer at the foot of his bed. "Ah, spooky! Cat got your tongue?" No, it doesn't really work here, does it? His mom comforts him and he goes back to sleep again. This is where the story should have ended, in my opinion. He sees the cat, and that's it. Ambiguous. We don't know what's really going on. It got him. It's a cat. But I lied, because this is not the climax of the story. We're only halfway through, and where it goes from here takes it from one of my favorite stories so far to being catastrophically mid. It spends the rest of the book just spinning its wheels like a dumpster truck, with Edward going to school and thinking he sees the cat. And then he goes to school and he thinks he sees the cat in the bushes. And he goes to school and thinks he sees the cat in the mirror. And he goes to school and he thinks he sees the cat on his bus. Now Edward was just a few feet from the bus when Eddie, one of the particularly obnoxious guys in his class, deliberately bumped into him. Edward staggered and almost fell. He was close enough to the bus to put out a hand and catch himself. When he did, he got a glimpse of the Jack face peeking out at him from behind the bus's back fender. It was clinging to the emergency exit, hidden between Edward's bus and the bus behind, down low where no one, except Edward, could see it. It was on his bus, Edward backed away. He was bumped again, this time by Julia. "Watch where you're going," she snapped at him. "Sorry." He didn't even look at her pretty wavy hair as he continued to backpedal. The buses in front of Edward's started to roll forward. "Coming?" the bus driver called from inside. Edward looked at the wheel well where he'd seen Jack's face. He thought he saw movement, but he wasn't sure. No, I forgot something. I'll walk. Thanks."
The
Cat.
in the...
School bus. Edward walks home from school, but sees that the cat is following him. The cat thing was capering along in Edward's wake. Its tail was up in the air as if it was having the time of its life. Life? It had no life. It wasn't alive. It was a thing. Edward wasn't fooled by the thing's happy expression. The smile was too set, too hard to suggest any good feelings. Given that the jack-faced cat was functioning, moving, maybe even, God forbid, thinking, it was fair to say it was alive, at least in a robotic way. That meant when he'd put it in the hole and covered it with dirt, he'd buried it alive. Was it angry? What would it do when it reached him? He tries to run away, but it chases him through the woods. This evil cat abomination's gonna get him. Remember how the butterflies, the first ones were like normal and they only lived a couple weeks and then the next one was evil? It's like how Faraday was a good kitty, but then the next one is evil. It's evil cat, except it's not. It's not. The story is so bad. The ending of the story is so bad. This is how it ends. He was beginning to think he was going to run himself into death from exhaustion when he noticed light creeping in between the trees ahead. He thought he heard the rush of an engine going past on the road. He was almost there. He tried to run faster, but he was so tired. His steps faltered. Something touched Edward's ankle. He glanced down. The jack-face smiled up at him. Edward screamed, put his head down, and pumped his arms to push his body even faster. Just a few more steps. He sprinted hard, his gaze firmly on the ground in front of him so he wouldn't trip over something and go down. He couldn't see clearly, though. Everything was blurry, probably because his eyes were filled with tears and sweat. It didn't matter. He kept running. He bolted forward, pelting away from the thing behind him, hurtling toward what he hoped was... Edward felt a flash of pain so intense that it couldn't possibly have been real. The pain was the last thing he felt. That the pain was incomprehensible was the last thing he thought. He never even had a chance to think sorry. What? He gets hit by a truck too? That's what this is building up to? It's ironic? It's not even ironic. This is nothing. I don't get it. I think Scott probably planned to have the sorry thing be like a running theme, but then Andrea Wagner just didn't do that. Like, he was constantly saying sorry for things that weren't his fault, and then he died. What does that mean? It doesn't mean anything. The cat makes a ticking noise when it moves because it's an animatronic. I have to wave my hand around because I'm used to having Toto on it, and I'm Italian. The ticking of the cat might be like a telltale heart thing, which would imply that Edward should be feeling guilty. He should be feeling guilty of something, but he's not. He blames himself for everything, always saying sorry. So it's very weird to me that he doesn't feel sorry for Jack's death. I think the moral is, look both ways before crossing the street, where sometimes bad things just happen. Anyway, I lied. That's not the end of the story. The end of the story makes it even worse. The semi-truck that hit Edward started skidding right after the impact. The driver, his eyes bulging, his heart racing, his stomach suddenly in a bilious knot, practically stood on the truck's brake pedal. Of course, it was too late. The semi-truck kept going for several yards before jackknifing to a stop. Well behind the truck, Edward's body lay in the road, a pool of blood widening around it. A few feet away, partially hidden in the ferns at the edge of the verge, a friendly face hunkered down. It flicked its robotic tail. Its smiling jack face kept its gaze serenely focused on Edward's still form. It would wait now. It would wait patiently for Edward to get back up so they could play some more. Analysis. So the cat was real, and harmless, and was probably just playing hide-and-seek and tag like the real cat did, and was never a threat. What? This story fell apart so hard. The first half was so promising, and then it Fazbear Frighted all over itself. No moral, nothing actually scary, twice as long as it should be, the same repeating thing happening over and over and over until we get to the climax, which is not thematic to the rest of the story. And then, as if that wasn't bad enough, the last paragraph takes all the teeth out of the story because there never was any danger. Maybe if we'd had scenes of Edward going crazy, it would have made sense, but the second half of this book is just so bad. The story isn't bad, the book is bad. I keep saying that books aren't movies, and this book has major "this reads like a description of a movie scene" syndrome. Like the scene where the cat is on his bus. Edward backed away. He was bumped again, this time by Julia. Okay, so my senses are not putting me into this scene. I'm just taking in the factual information that the cat is there. In a movie, you could have a close-up on the cat and a musical sting to scare you, to startle the audience the same way that Edward is startled. But the book doesn't do that. It just says, the cat is here. The cat is in the bus. Cat is on the page. I would have written this paragraph differently, because I'm the most smarterest person ever. Let me read you what I would have written. It was on his bus. Edward's face contorted into a traitorous mask of his own deepest fright. His eyes wide, his teeth bared as if in the snarl of a cornered animal more frightened than angry. Even with his heart pumping faster and harder than it ever had before, there wasn't enough blood going to his brain to process his surroundings, and all he felt was the primal urge to turn and run. But his body refused to let him turn his back on the thing. His vision seemed vignetted and spotty like a camera trying to focus on something impossible. And when consciousness returned to him, the friendly face was gone. Would I still criticize this for being like the other dozen scenes where he sees the cat and then it goes missing? Yes. But at least I would feel the fright. I would feel like I was seeing it. If I was Edward, I'm seeing it through his eyes. I'm getting his sensory data input, which is more than just being told that there's a cat. If the book was written like I, the reader, am being scared, it would have been a much better, enjoyable read. Again, the story, the plot point, is fine. But the last half of the story being the same repeated motif over and over and over again, without even focusing on Edward maybe like thinking he's losing his mind, is so boring. I really like the movie Smile. It's not like a perfect film or anything, but I think it's genuinely scary. And at the end of it, the main character is nearly incoherent to people who can't see the monster because they've been behaving erratically. Their decisions don't make any sense, but that's fine because the movie built up to it. The book just says, Edward was scared. Edward ran away from the cat. Edward ran out on the road. There was a truck. The story felt like it was winding down when the cat got into Edward's room at night during the thunderstorm. Because thunderstorms are scary. Something coming for you in the night through your door is scary. Then it went on for another 40 pages, and we get hit with the whammy of a bad decision of having the cat not even be a real threat. Edward was hit by a truck. Okay, and the moral is? It's not like Edward was responsible for Jack getting hurt. So why does he also get hurt? Why is he being punished? I know a lot of these stories are about, like, the main character didn't deserve their punishment, but typically it's still a moral for the reader to be like, don't act like them. But what did Edward do wrong that we shouldn't act like? Don't clone your pet by sending it into Freddy Fazbear. It's not even a clone, it's just a robot. It's not profound, it's nothing. Also, a lot of these stories end with the main character dying, and then it cuts to, like, a paragraph of a character who doesn't know they're dead, and it's like, oh no, that's so sad. Like, it happened with Millie, it happened in... what's the stupid book where he's in FNAF 3, What We Found? A lot of the characters die, and then their friends like, oh boy, I can't wait to see my buddy. But the thing with that perspective is the cat, which is not scary. Am I, the child reading this, supposed to be scared that Jack the cat might be lurking in the bushes at night? Jack the kitten? Jack the killer kitten? It's not even a killer, that's the point. No, it's just a cat. Smiling cat with human boy's face that will play tag with you until you run on the road is not one of the great monsters of horror literature. Also, the book doesn't even mention that black cats are unlucky, like you think that would come up. And that was Friendly Face, an extreme disappointment after a solid start. I hope the next story makes up for it. The next story is Sea Bonnies. Thank you for watching. Be sure to be nice to each other in the comments. Consider supporting the creators you admire by becoming one of my patrons or joining my YouTube memberships or buying my merch. Never lose sight of the things that are important to you, because if you lose sight of them, they might run out on the road. And remember that Freddy stands for Friendly, Respectful Engagement, Discussion, and Discourse Yields Success. I would like to thank my July patrons: Brandon, Lauren V, Morgan, Nan, Scott, Sophie, Suka, and Wooly, as well as Billy, Chamikon, Klaus, Kopacker Fan, Eliza, Halmar, Johnny the Night Guard, Kira, Lauren R, Rose, Sebhar, Thamagata, World's Greatest Bard, Ya Boy Peachy, Zany Face, and Zimmy, as well as Emily, Gremlin, HHD, Jinx, Jose, Mustard Shirt Guy, Rolo, and Riley, as well as Ellie, Jojo, Jeannie, Mariuna, and Ray. I would also like to thank my channel members, my night guards. Those who made it to night 1, Spark Saturn, Sleepy, Nolan, Arcadeus, Toolshed Inc., Liz, Violet Poppy, Haley, Sophie, Poppy, Theory Chum, Riley, JT Kelly 18, Golden Productions, Louie, and Jackie. Those who made it to night 2, Mrs. Trap and your boy Peachy. Those who made it to night 3, The Moving Marker, I Blue Renditional, and Just Because. Those who made it to night 4, Other Zach, Gabriel, Kethry, Apple Juice, YS, Joe Show, Fish XX, Passion Fruit, Desire Without Emotion, Jeremy, Aaron, Everett, Nemesis, Zemoit, Victoria, King, Aldo, CE, Lydia, Riley, Supergo, Krypriva, Scott, Morse, Heyboyi, Alex, CWF, Dan B, Gemis Heresy, Mike, Hyrule YT, Remington, YouTube Guy, Hathor the Cow, Maggie, Fazbear Entertainment, Over Under 99, Este Gleefire, Jetray, Gordon, Leon, Cody the Viking, Dr. Pepper, Dare Stare, KK, Unk, Bob, and Icemint. And those who made it to night 5, Momo Peaches and Suka. Explain.
I tried to turn myself into a bluebird to fly. Yeah. 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 Jag snart vill morgon in.
Like the butterfly effect.
No, like the Wizard of Oz. Keep up! I wanted to fly beyond the rainbow, to reach another world, the world my sister is locked in.
Is that why you adopted this guy? His name is Ozzy. To teach you how to fly?
Yes, but I didn't realize flying through a rainbow would turn me into a spectrum of colors. When I did, something changed inside me. The rainbow filtered out the colorless part of me. It created a dark, colorless being. My other half. My shadow Toto.
Is that why you can talk normal now, because your doppelganger's gone?
Yes.
Because this was one big Twin Peaks homage?
Also yes.
Where's this shadow Toto now?
I think he may have made it to Cambridge.